Good evening, everyone. From the west side of the Berlin Wall at the Brandenburg Gate, I'm Tom Brokaw. The Brandenburg Gate, of course, is in East Berlin, and the sound that you hear and what you're seeing tonight, not hammers and sickles, but hammers and chisels as young people take down this wall bit by bit.
For 44 years, the Berlin Wall was a symbol of ideological divisions. Lasting from 1947 all the way to 1991, a time called the Cold War impacted American citizens and the way they viewed different political ideologies. The Cold War was a time of extreme social and political tensions between the US and the USSR because of differing opinions on the roles of the government. Mainly inspired by the world's fear of communism, countries began to threaten and take action against communist powers in order to dissolve the communist theory. When the Cold War was just beginning to peak, Germany was split into 4 Allied occupation zones. Berlin, which was inside the Soviets portion, was similarly divided among the Allies. Russia then decided they no longer wanted to allow the presence of the Allied powers within their region and decided to take action to push out the UK, France, and the US. To do this, the Soviets created a blockade in 1948 to starve the citizens from the city. Aircraft from the Allies flew over the blockade and delivered supplies to the citizens, creating the Berlin Airlift. The unsuccessful blockade only angered the Russians more in their attempt to drive out the capitalist regime. To escape unfair practices in communist Berlin, citizens began to flee to West Berlin to join the capitalist country. Many families and friends could easily escape the country with its barbed wire fencing. People even jumped out of building windows that were on the border. Between 1945 and 1961, 15 to 20% of the eastern population left for the West. This upset the current Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, which led him to convince East Germany to close its borders with the West for good. The wall was then built along with other defense systems like guard dogs, ditches, searchlights, mines, and even a second wall.
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone. Hey! Teacher, leave them kids alone. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, you're just another brick in the wall.
Police and military forces lined the walls day and night to keep the borders secure. Armed soldiers would shoot anyone on sight attempting to escape the east. Don't hesitate to use your weapon even when border breaches happen with women and children, one East German Secret Service file from 1973 read. Desperate escapes such as a stolen tank and even a hot air balloon took place near the wall. At least 138 people in total died from a failed escape. On October 1961, tensions began to grow on each side of the border. When a U.S. chief at mission in West Berlin tried to enter the east, he was denied access. This caused a standoff between East and West tanks at Checkpoint Charlie. The tanks stared each other down for several hours until John F. Kennedy contacted Nikita and convinced him to withdraw the tanks. World War III was too close for comfort for citizens on each side and around the world. Neither sides knew whether or not the wall would be a permanent addition to Berlin. Both the West and the East were taking daring moves that could easily be depicted as acts of war. Surprisingly, war was never declared. As time went on, a new candidate for the leader of the USSR was to be appointed. Mikhail Gorbachev was the guy for the job. Gorby promoted his programs of glasnost, which meant for openness, and perestroika, which meant for reconstruction within the USSR. Gorby was leading the USSR to a more democratic environment. During a speech at the United Nations in 1988, he announced that nations should be able to choose their fate without outside interference, and the amount of troops and tanks in East Berlin was to be greatly diminished. Although his intentions were to reconstruct the economy of the USSR began to crumble with the wall. As soon as 1989, Gorbachev announced that all citizens of the GDR could visit both sides of Berlin.
Здравствуйте, Gorbachev.
Hello, Colby. This is the White House. Ronald Reagan speaking.
Hello, my old friend. How are you today?
Finally, it's time for a daily chess match. Are you ready?
Yes. My last move yesterday was a 3 from
broadcasting live from the White House in Washington, D.C. Tonight we are going to join in for the 42nd meeting in a chess competition between the presidents of the United States and the
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
After the gates opened, a celebration erupted around the wall. Families drank, danced, and began to smash out their anger on the wall. People shared hammers and picks to chip away the wall while bulldozers and cranes took away the wall piece by piece. And out of all the artists in the world, an actor named David Hasselhoff was invited to sing live on television with the fall of the wall.
Okay.
One morning in June, some 20 years ago, I was born a rich man's son. I had everything that money could buy, but freedom